Captain Jake Morrison stared at the navigation display of his ship as it floated in the dark space near the outer edge of human territory. The UES Titan was 3 months into a routine patrol mission, checking trade routes and watching for pirates. Jake had done this job for 8 years and usually nothing exciting happened. Today felt different. "Captain, I'm getting something strange on the communications array," said Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez from her station. She was the ship's communications officer, a young woman who was good at her job, but had never seen anything like this before. "It's broadcasting on every frequency we can detect." Jake walked over to her station. The bridge was quiet except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. "What kind of signal?" Amy frowned as she worked with the controls. "It's not like any language in our database. The pattern is complex, almost like mathematics turned into sound. But Captain, it's coming from everywhere. Every sensor station in this sector is picking it up." "Put it through the speakers," Jake said. The bridge filled with a strange, beautiful sound. It was like music, but sad and urgent at the same time. The tones rose and fell in patterns that seemed to mean something, even though none of the crew could understand what. Commander Dan Hayes, Jake's second in command, looked up from his own station. "That doesn't sound like any species we've made contact with before." "Keep working on it, Amy," Jake said. "Try to find where it's coming from." Amy typed commands into her computer. "The signal is strongest from the direction of the Zephyr system. That's about 2 days' travel from here at full speed." Jake knew about the Zephyr system. It had 2 stars that circled each other and several planets that no human had ever visited. The area was marked as unexplored on their maps. No one had ever received any signals from that direction before. "There's something else, Captain," Amy said, her voice excited. "I think I'm starting to understand parts of the message. It's using mathematical concepts we know, like prime numbers and geometric shapes. Someone is trying to communicate." Jake made his decision quickly. "Dan, set course for the Zephyr system. Best speed." "Yes, sir," Dan replied, already working at his station. As the Titan changed direction and increased speed, Amy continued working on the message. After several hours, she called Jake back to her station. "Captain, I think I've figured out some of it," she said. "The beings sending this message call themselves something like Zephyrians. They're asking for help. Their star system is dying, and they need someone to help them escape." Jake felt a chill run down his back. "Are you sure?" "Pretty sure, sir. They keep repeating certain patterns. One seems to mean help and another means dying or ending. They're also sending what looks like scientific data about their star system." Dr. Susan Wright, the ship's medical officer, had been listening from her station nearby. "Captain, if their star system really is dying, we might be looking at an entire species facing extinction." "How many of them are there?" Jake asked Amy. Amy worked with the signal for a few more minutes. "Based on the complexity of the message and the power needed to broadcast it this far, I'd guess millions of them. Maybe more." The bridge became quiet as everyone thought about this. Jake had been in space long enough to know that most species in the galaxy kept to themselves. Humans had made contact with about 20 different alien races, but most of those contacts had been brief and not very friendly. For someone to send a message asking for help to everyone who could hear it, they had to be desperate. "Any idea what's wrong with their star system?" Jake asked Dr. Wright. "Not yet. But if they're broadcasting to the entire galaxy, it must be something they can't handle themselves," she replied. 2 days later, the Titan arrived at the edge of the Zephyr system. What they saw through the ship's telescopes was both beautiful and terrible. The 2 stars in the center were much brighter than they should be, and huge streams of fire and energy were flowing between them. The space around the stars was filled with dangerous radiation. "My God," whispered Dan Hayes. "Those stars are going to explode." Chief Engineer Pete Clark had joined them on the bridge to see this. He studied the readings on his instruments. "Captain, those stars are in the final stage of their lives. When they explode, everything in this system will be destroyed." "How long do we have?" Jake asked. Pete worked with his calculations. "Hard to say exactly, but based on the radiation levels and the energy output, maybe 6 months, maybe less." Amy had been monitoring the communications during their approach. Captain, the signal is much stronger now, and I'm getting responses from other locations. Other ships? Yes, sir. There are at least a dozen different responses to the Zephyrian's message. Most of them seem to be saying no or impossible. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. Here was an entire species about to die, and other civilizations were just ignoring their calls for help. Can we communicate with the Zephyrians directly? He asked Amy. I think so. I've learned enough of their mathematical language to send a simple message. Do it. Tell them we're here and we want to help. Amy worked at her station for several minutes, then sent the message. They didn't have to wait long for a response. The return message was much more complex than anything they had received before. Amy worked to translate it, her eyes growing wider as she understood more. Captain, they're saying they can't believe someone actually answered. They thought they were going to die alone. Amy's voice was quiet. They're also warning us that helping them will be very dangerous. They need to move 17 million people to a new world. 17 million. Dan repeated softly. There's more, Amy continued. They're offering something in return. They have technology they say could help us. Advanced power systems, computers, things we've never seen before. Jake looked at the display showing the dying stars. Somewhere in this system, 17 million beings were waiting to die unless someone helped them. Other species had already said no. The job was dangerous and probably impossible. Amy, send them a message, Jake said. Tell them we'll help them, but we need to know more about what they need. Captain, Dan said quietly, we can't move 17 million people with one ship. We'll need the entire fleet, maybe more. Then we'll get the entire fleet, Jake replied. The response from the Zephyrians came quickly. Amy translated as the message arrived. They're sending coordinates for their main planet. They want us to come see their situation for ourselves. And Captain, they're saying something else. They're asking if we're really willing to help, even though we don't know them, and even though it's dangerous. Jake looked at his crew. These were good people who had signed up to protect human space and help people in trouble. The Zephyrians weren't human, but they were people facing death. Send them our answer, he said. Tell them yes, we'll help them. Tell them humans don't leave people behind. As the Titan moved deeper into the Zephyr system, toward a planet full of strangers who needed help, Jake wondered if they were flying toward the most important mission of their lives, or toward disaster. Maybe both. The dying stars burned brighter. Behind them and somewhere ahead, 17 million voices waited for salvation. Fleet Admiral Lisa Carter sat in her office on Mars, looking at the report that Captain Jake Morrison had sent from the Zephyr system. The pictures showed beautiful crystal cities that looked like they were made of light itself. But the readings also showed radiation levels that would kill any human in minutes. She pressed the button on her desk to call an emergency meeting of the Human Colonial Council. Within an hour, the most important people in human space were gathered in the meeting room, either in person or by video link from other planets. We have a situation, Admiral Carter began, showing the images from Jake's ship. An entire alien species is about to die and they've asked us for help. Council Chairman Robert Cole looked at the data. 17 million beings. Lisa, do we even have enough ships to move that many people? Not easily, she admitted. We'd need to use every transport ship we have, plus convert civilian vessels. And that's if we can figure out how to keep them alive during the trip. Dr. Kevin Shaw, Earth's top expert on alien life, studied the biological data that Jake's team had collected. These Zephyrians are unlike anything we've encountered before, he said. They're made of pure energy, but they live inside crystal shells. What would be a small static shock to us could kill them instantly. So, how do we transport them? Asked Governor Sarah Martinez from the Luna colony. Very carefully, Dr. Shaw replied. We'd need special containment fields for each one. The ships would need to be completely redesigned. Admiral Carter brought up a star chart. There's another problem. The only safe route out of their system goes through space controlled by the Vortac Empire. Everyone in the room knew about the Vortacs. They were a warrior species that had been expanding their territory for decades. They enslaved other races and used them as workers in their factories and mines. The Vortacs won't just let us pass through with refugees, said General Patricia Wong. They'll try to capture the Zephyrians for themselves. Why would they want them? Asked Chairman Cole. Dr. Shaw pulled up more data. According to what the Zephyrians have shared, their technology is incredibly advanced. They have perfect, clean energy, computers that work faster than anything we can build, and materials we can't even understand yet. So the Vortex would see them as valuable slaves, Admiral Carter said grimly. The room fell quiet as everyone thought about the situation. Finally, Governor Martinez spoke up. Maybe we should let someone else handle this. The Galactic Federation or the Centauri Alliance. I already checked, Admiral Carter said. 12 different civilizations have received the Zephyrians' plea for help. All of them said no. They think it's too dangerous, too expensive, or just impossible. Maybe they're right, said Chairman Cole. We're still rebuilding from the resource wars. Our colonies need every ship we have for protection and supply runs. And if we use our entire fleet for this rescue mission, we leave human space defenseless, added General Wong. Admiral Carter nodded. All true. But there's something else to consider. The Zephyrians are offering us their technology in exchange for help. That could change everything for humanity. She brought up more images, showing Zephyrian power plants and factories. Imagine if we never had to worry about energy again. Imagine computers that could solve problems we can't even think of. Imagine materials that could let us build better ships, better habitats, better everything. If we can keep the technology out of Vortac hands, General Wong pointed out. The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that humanity couldn't afford to risk everything for strangers. Others said that the technology was worth any risk. A few simply said it was the right thing to do. Finally, Admiral Carter called for a vote. All in favor of authorizing a rescue mission? The vote was close. 7 in favor, 5 against. Admiral Carter's was the deciding vote. Motion passes, she said. We're going to try to save the Zephyrians. While the council meeting was happening, Captain Jake Morrison and his crew were approaching the main Zephyrian planet. What they saw took their breath away. The planet looked like a giant jewel floating in space. Cities made of crystal spires rose from the surface, glowing with soft light. Between the cities, gardens of crystal plants created patterns of color. Across the landscape, it's beautiful, whispered Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez. And dying, added Dr. Susan Wright, looking at her medical scanners. The radiation from their sun is getting stronger every day. Look at the readings from their atmosphere. Chief Engineer Pete Clark was already thinking about the practical problems. Captain, how are we going to get down to the surface? Our shuttles won't protect us from that radiation. The Zephyrians are sending us coordinates for a safe landing area, Amy reported. They say they have shields that can protect us for a short time. The shuttle ride down to the planet was unlike anything the humans had experienced. As they got closer to the surface, they could see that the crystal cities were actually alive with movement. Beings of light floated through the crystal corridors, going about their daily lives even though their world was ending. The Zephyrians who met them at the landing area were hard to look at directly. They appeared to be made of pure energy, but shaped like tall, thin humans. Their leader introduced himself as Chancellor Vexhai. You came, the Chancellor said through a translation device. We did not think anyone would answer our call. Captain Morrison looked around at the Crystal City. Even with the protective shields, he could feel the radiation burning in the air. How long do you have? Our scientists estimate 4 months, before the radiation levels become deadly to us, Chancellor Vexhai replied. 6 months before our sun explodes. Dr. Wright was taking readings with her medical equipment. Captain, the radiation here is already 100 times higher than what humans can safely handle. For the Zephyrians, it must be like slowly cooking. Yet you came here anyway, the Chancellor observed. Your species willingly enters dangerous places to help others? Sometimes, Captain Morrison said, when people need help. The other species, who answered our call, said we were asking for the impossible. Chancellor Vexhai continued. They said no one could move 17 million people in such a short time. Chief Engineer Pete Clark was studying the Zephyrian technology around them. Chancellor, your people would need special transportation. Our normal ships would kill you. Yes, we understand this. That is why we offer our knowledge in exchange. We can show you how to build the containers we need. But we understand if it is too difficult. Captain Morrison looked at his crew. They had traveled across space to see if this rescue was possible. Now they were standing on a dying world, talking to people who expected to die because no one else would help them. We'll find a way, he said finally. The Chancellor's energy form seemed to brighten. You will try? We'll do more than try. Humans don't give up easily. Over the next several days, the human crew worked with Zephyrian scientists to understand exactly what the rescue would require. The news was both good and bad. The good news was that Zephyrian technology could solve many of the transportation problems. Their energy shields could be adapted to protect ships traveling through the dangerous space around their dying star. Their computer systems could help calculate the complex logistics of moving millions of people. The bad news was that the rescue would require hundreds of ships making multiple trips. The Zephyrians would need to be transported in special containers that would take weeks to build, and every trip would have to go through Vortac space. The Vortacs will try to stop us, Captain Morrison told Chancellor Vexhai during one of their planning meetings. We know of the Vortacs, the Chancellor replied. They are a violent species. We had hoped to avoid contact with them. You might not have a choice, Morrison said. The only safe route to the worlds where we can relocate your people goes right through their territory. Then what do we do? Morrison looked at the crystal city around them, thinking of 17 million people who would die if this rescue failed. We make sure we're ready for a fight. As the human crew prepared to return to their ship with the plans for the rescue mission, Chancellor Vexhai had one more question. Captain Morrison, why are your people willing to risk so much for strangers? Morrison thought about it for a moment. Because it's the right thing to do, and because when someone asks for help, humans answer. The shuttle lifted off from the dying world, carrying plans for the most ambitious rescue mission in galactic history. Behind them, 17 million Zephyrians waited to see if the strange beings from the death world called Earth could really save them all. The first rescue ships arrived at the Zephyr system 3 weeks after Captain Jake Morrison's initial contact. Admiral Lisa Carter had managed to gather over 200 vessels of all sizes. Military transports, civilian cargo ships, passenger liners, and even mining vessels had been converted to carry the special containment pods that would keep the Zephyrians alive during transport. Captain Kate Johnson commanded one of the largest civilian ships in the fleet. The New Denver had been a luxury passenger liner before the war, but now its elegant dining rooms and entertainment decks were filled with rows of glowing containment units. Each unit held one Zephyrian refugee, suspended in a field of energy that protected them from the harsh environment of normal space. How many do we have on board now? Kate asked her first officer, Lieutenant Mark Taylor. 4,200, Mark replied, checking his tablet. That's about half our maximum capacity. Kate nodded and looked out the viewport at the dying planet below. Every few hours, shuttles would arrive carrying more Zephyrians in portable containment units. The process was slow and dangerous because of the increasing radiation from the unstable stars. Dr. Lisa Park had volunteered to stay with the refugee fleet as a cultural specialist. She spent her days talking with the Zephyrians, trying to understand their society and help them cope with leaving their home forever. They're not like any species we've encountered before, she reported to Admiral Carter during one of their regular communications. They've been peaceful for so long that many of them have never even heard of war. The idea of fighting to defend themselves is completely foreign to them. That might be a problem, Admiral Carter replied. Intelligence reports suggest the Vortacs are moving ships into position along our planned route. The intelligence was correct. Warlord Krextar of the Vortac Empire had been watching the human rescue operation with great interest. The Vortacs had tried for years to get their hands on Zephyrian technology, but the peaceful aliens had always avoided contact. Now, with the Zephyrians forced to leave their world, it was the perfect opportunity. Let the humans do the hard work of collecting them, Krextar told his fleet commanders. Then we take the refugees when they pass through our space. The technology, they possess will make us the most powerful empire in the galaxy. The first convoy of refugee ships was halfway to their destination when the Vortac struck. Commander Tony Garcia's destroyer, the UES Defiant, was escorting 12 transport ships through the Nexus asteroid belt when his sensors detected incoming Vortac warships. Contact bearing 270, called out Ensign David Kim from the sensor station. 3 Vortac cruisers closing fast. Tony looked at the tactical display. The transport ships were slow and defenseless. His destroyer was outnumbered and outgunned, but 12 ships full of refugees were depending on him. All transports, emergency scatter protocol, he ordered. Use the asteroids for cover. Defiant. We'll hold them off. Captain Kate Johnson, commanding the New Denver, received the order with a sinking heart. Her ship was carrying 4,000 Zephyrians who would die if the Vortacs captured them. You heard the commander, she told her crew. Take us into the asteroid field. Best speed. The Defiant turned to face the 3 Vortac cruisers. Tony knew his ship was no match for them in a straight fight, but humans had learned to use unconventional tactics against stronger enemies. Take us into the densest part of the asteroid field, he ordered his pilot. Let's see if the Vortacs are brave enough to follow us. The Vortac ships were larger and more powerful, but they were also less maneuverable. As the Defiant weaved between massive asteroids, the Vortac cruisers had trouble keeping up. When they tried to fire their heavy weapons, the asteroids blocked their shots or absorbed the damage. Sir, we've got one of them following us too closely, reported the tactical officer. He's about to hit that big asteroid on his port side. Tony smiled grimly. Then let's give him a reason to change course quickly. He ordered his crew to fire all weapons at the asteroid, not at the Vortac ship. The explosion sent huge chunks of rock flying in all directions. The Vortac cruiser, trying to avoid the debris, crashed into another asteroid and was destroyed. The other 2 Vortac ships, seeing their companion's fate, decided to retreat rather than risk the dangerous asteroid field. The transport ships, including the New Denver, escaped safely, but the encounter worried Admiral Carter. If the Vortacs were willing to attack even small convoys, what would they do when the main refugee fleet tried to pass through their space? Meanwhile, Major Ben Torres was leading a secret mission to establish supply stations along the evacuation route. His team included some of the best soldiers in the human military, including Sergeant Amy Long and Corporal Steve Miller. They were experts at setting up bases in hostile environments. The next supply depot needs to go here, Ben said, pointing to a map of an uninhabited moon. It's right at the edge of Vortac space, but we need a place where our ships can refuel and make repairs. Amy studied the terrain scans. Looks like solid rock with a thin atmosphere. We can work with that. What about the Vortacs? Asked Steve. They patrol this area regularly. That's why we're going to build it underground, Ben replied. Hidden base, emergency supplies, and enough firepower to defend it if we have to. The team spent 2 weeks building the hidden supply station. They worked mostly at night to avoid Vortac patrols, using specially designed equipment that produced very little heat or electromagnetic signature. By the time they were finished, the base was completely invisible from space. But while they were working, Steve discovered something troubling. Major, take a look at these communication intercepts, he said, showing Ben a tablet with decoded Vortac messages. Ben read the messages and felt his blood run cold. They're not just planning to attack our convoys. They want to capture all the refugees and use them as slaves. There's more, Amy added. They've figured out that Zephyrian technology could give them a huge military advantage. They're planning to force the refugees to build weapons for them. Ben immediately sent an encrypted message back to Admiral Carter. The situation was worse than they had thought. The Vortacs weren't just pirates looking for an easy target. They were planning to use the Zephyrian refugees to build an army that could conquer half the galaxy. Back in the Zephyr system, the evacuation was running into new problems. The dying stars were becoming more unstable, and radiation levels were rising faster than predicted. Chief Engineer Pete Clark was working around the clock to modify more ships for refugee transport. Captain, we're running out of time, he told Jake Morrison. At this rate, we'll only be able to evacuate about half the population before the radiation becomes lethal. Jake studied the latest reports from the Zephyrian scientists. What if we overload our ship's engines? Push them beyond safe limits? That's incredibly dangerous, Pete warned. If the engines fail, we could explode. And even if they don't fail, we'll burn them out completely. But we could evacuate more people? Pete nodded reluctantly. Maybe another 1,000 per trip. But Captain, if we lose a ship trying this, we'll lose everyone on board. Jake looked out at the crystal cities below, where millions of Zephyrians were waiting for rescue. Many of them had never been off their planet before. They were trusting humanity to save them, even though they barely knew what humans were. Do it, he decided. Modify the engines. We'll take the risk. Dr. Susan Wright had been working with Zephyrian medical specialists to understand how their people were being affected by the increasing radiation. Captain, some of them are already getting sick, she reported. Their energy forms are becoming unstable. If we don't get them out soon, they'll start dying even before the sun explodes. The next convoy departure was scheduled for the following day. Jake had made the difficult decision to overload the Titan's engines to carry an extra 1,000 refugees. As the ship lifted off from the dying planet, alarms began sounding in the engine room. Engine temperature is in the red zone, Pete reported over the intercom, but we're holding together. Jake watched the planet fall away behind them, knowing that each trip might be their last, but also knowing that every Zephyrian they saved was a victory against the darkness. In the passenger areas, converted to hold containment pods, Dr. Lisa Park was talking to some of the refugees. One of them, a young Zephyrian named Learhigh, asked her a question that stayed with her for days. Dr. Park, why do humans risk their lives for people they don't know? Lisa thought about it for a long time before answering. Because that's what people do for each other, and because we believe that every life is worth saving. As the Titan pushed through space with its overloaded engines, carrying 1,000 Zephyrian refugees toward safety, Jake knew that they were fighting more than just time and radiation. They were fighting to prove that sometimes the right thing to do was also the possible thing to do. The moon called Sanctuary floated in space like a perfect jewel. Its surface was covered with green forests and blue lakes, and the electromagnetic conditions were exactly right for Zephyrian life. It should have been the perfect new home for the refugees. There was only one problem. The Vortac Empire had claimed it first. Admiral Lisa Carter stood on the bridge of her flagship, the UES Valiant, looking at the tactical display. Intelligence reports showed that Warlord Krextar had moved his entire battle fleet to Sanctuary. Over 300 Vortac warships were positioned around the moon, waiting for the human refugee convoy to arrive. Admiral, we're outnumbered 3-1, reported Commander Helen Brooks, her tactical officer. The Vortacs have more ships, bigger guns, and stronger shields. Lisa studied the enemy formation. But they're not expecting us to fight for it. They think we'll just hand over the refugees to avoid a battle. Won't we? Asked Captain Ryan Murphy, who commanded one of the escort destroyers. Admiral, those transport ships are full of civilians. If we fight, some of them could be destroyed. Lisa looked at the intelligence reports again. Major Ben Torres had sent detailed information about Vortac plans. If the Vortacs captured the Zephyrians, they would be forced to build weapons until they died. It would be slavery worse than death. We fight, she decided. Send word to all ships. We're going to give the Zephyrians their new home, no matter what it costs. On the surface of Sanctuary, Colonel Frank White was setting up a defensive base with his Marine battalion. They had landed 3 days earlier and were working around the clock to build shelter for the arriving refugees. Colonel, we've got movement. On the horizon, reported Sergeant Jennifer Clark, who was manning the perimeter sensors. Vortac dropships, at least 20 of them. Frank grabbed his rifle and called for his troops to take defensive positions. They're trying to take the surface before the main battle starts, he told his second-in-command, Major Alex Turner. If they control the landing zones, the refugees won't have anywhere safe to go. The Vortac ground forces that emerged from the dropships were exactly what Frank had expected. They were large, heavily armored warriors who carried weapons designed to kill and capture, rather than just destroy. They wanted the Zephyrians alive. Remember, we're not just defending a piece of ground, Frank told his Marines over the radio. We're defending the future home of 17 million refugees. Don't let them through. The battle for Sanctuary's surface was brutal and fast. The Vortacs had more soldiers, but the human Marines knew the terrain better and fought with desperate determination. Sergeant Clark's squad held a critical hill for 6 hours against overwhelming odds. Private Nathan Ross single-handedly destroyed 3 Vortac vehicles with improvised explosives. Meanwhile, Engineer Maria Santos was leading civilian construction, teams in building the habitat domes that would house the Zephyrian refugees. Even with the battle raging around them, the work continued. "Keep building," she told her workers as Vortac artillery shells exploded nearby. "Those people are counting on us to have their homes ready." Her team included both humans and several Zephyrians who had arrived on the advanced ships. Working together, they created shelters that combined human engineering with Zephyrian energy technology. The domes were both beautiful and practical, providing perfect protection for the energy-based aliens. In space above Sanctuary, the main battle was about to begin. Captain Jake Morrison had arrived with the largest convoy of refugee ships yet, carrying over 50,000 Zephyrians. The transport ships were slow and defenseless, perfect targets for the waiting Vortac fleet. "Admiral Carter, this is Captain Morrison," Jake reported over the communication system. "Convoy 7 is approaching. Sanctuary. We count 300 enemy ships between us and the moon." "Understood, Jake," Lisa replied. "All escort ships form up for battle. We're going through them." The human fleet was smaller, but it had advantages the Vortacs didn't expect. Chief Engineer Pete Clark had been working with Zephyrian scientists to upgrade human ships with alien technology. The results were impressive. "Pete, are the new shields ready?" Jake asked over the intercom. "Ready and tested, Captain," Pete replied from the engine room. "The Zephyrian energy harmonics integrate perfectly with our defense systems. We should be able to absorb twice as much damage as before." The upgrades had been Chancellor Vexhi's idea. For the first time in their peaceful history, the Zephyrians were actively participating in their own defense. They couldn't fight directly, but they could share their technology with the humans who were fighting for them. Dr. Kevin Shaw had made another important discovery while working with Zephyrian technology. "Admiral, we can use their energy systems to disrupt Vortac computer networks," he reported from his research ship. "If we hit them with the right frequency, we can shut down their command and control systems." "How long will the effect last?" Lisa asked. "Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15. But during that time their ships won't be able to coordinate attacks or share targeting data." Lisa smiled for the first time in days. "That might be enough. All ships prepare for battle. We're going to show the Vortacs what happens when they threaten refugees." The Battle of Sanctuary began when the first Vortac ships opened fire on the approaching convoy. Human escort vessels immediately moved to intercept, their upgraded shields flashing as they absorbed enemy weapons fire. Lieutenant Sam Foster was piloting one of the human fighters, weaving between the massive Vortac battleships, like he was flying through an obstacle course. "This is just like flying through the asteroid rings back home," he told his wingman over the radio. "Except the asteroids are shooting back." Sam's squadron had been tasked with protecting the transport ships while the larger human vessels engaged the Vortac fleet. It was dangerous work, but Sam treated it like an extreme sport, using his fighters' superior maneuverability to stay ahead of enemy fire. "Sam, you've got 3 Vortac fighters on your tail," warned his wingman, Lieutenant Carl Hayes. "I see them," Sam replied, diving toward the surface of Sanctuary. "Let's see if they're crazy enough to follow me into the atmosphere." The Vortac pilots tried to follow, but Sam knew his ship better than they knew theirs. He used the moon's gravity and atmospheric drag to outmaneuver them, leading 2 of the enemy fighters into a collision with each other. Meanwhile, Dr. Shaw was ready to test his new weapon. "Admiral, I'm broadcasting the disruptor frequency now," he reported. Across the Vortac fleet, computer systems began failing. Ships that had been firing in coordinated volleys suddenly stopped responding to commands. Some Vortac vessels even began firing on their own allies as their targeting computers malfunctioned. "Now," Admiral Carter ordered, "all ships attack while they're confused." The human fleet pressed their advantage, focusing their fire on the largest Vortac ships. Captain Morrison's transport convoy, protected by the upgraded shields, pushed through the enemy lines toward Sanctuary's surface. On the moon below, Colonel Frank White's Marines were winning their own battle. The Vortac ground forces, cut off from orbital support by the disrupted communications, began to retreat. Vortac dropships are pulling back, reported Sergeant Clark. I think they're giving up. Don't let your guard down, Frank warned. They might try again. But the Vortacs were having problems of their own. Without their computer networks, they couldn't coordinate between space and ground forces. Ships were colliding with each other as their navigation systems failed. Some Vortac commanders, thinking they were being betrayed by their allies, began attacking other Vortac ships. Warlord Krextar watched his fleet falling apart from the bridge of his flagship. What is happening? He demanded. The humans have some kind of new weapon, his tactical officer reported. It's disrupting all our systems. Krextar had built his career on fighting enemies who used conventional tactics. The humans were doing something completely unexpected, and his fleet wasn't prepared for it. All ships, retreat to minimum safe distance, he ordered. We'll regroup and attack again when our systems are restored. But Admiral Carter wasn't going to give him that chance. All ships, pursue the enemy, she ordered. Don't let them escape to threaten the refugees again. The human fleet chased the retreating Vortacs away from Sanctuary, their upgraded weapons and shields giving them a decisive advantage. Within hours, Krextar's fleet was scattered and running for Vortac space. As the last enemy ships disappeared into hyperspace, Captain Morrison's convoy finally reached Sanctuary's surface. The transport ships landed near the habitat domes that Maria Santos and her team had built, and the Zephyrian refugees began emerging from their containment pods. Chancellor Vex High was among the first to step onto the surface of their new world. The elderly Zephyrian leader looked around at the green forests and blue skies, then at the human soldiers and engineers who had made this moment possible. We are home, he said simply. Jake Morrison stood nearby, watching as thousands of Zephyrians emerged from the transport ships and saw their new world for the first time. Many of them had never seen a blue sky or green plants before. Their homeworld had been all crystal and metal. Dr. Lisa Park was helping some of the refugee children adjust to their new environment. The gravity is a little different here, she explained, but you'll get used to it. 1 year after the Battle of Sanctuary, Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of his new flagship, watching the stars through the reinforced windows. The ship was unlike anything humans had built before. Its hull was made from a combination of human steel and Zephyrian crystal, creating armor that was both strong and beautiful. The engines used Zephyrian energy technology, making the ship faster and more efficient than any vessel in the galaxy. The evacuation of the Zephyr system had been completed 6 months ago. The final rescue ships had escaped just days before the binary stars finally exploded in a blast of light that could be seen from neighboring systems. 17 million Zephyrians now lived on Sanctuary, and 3 other worlds that humans had helped them settle. Admiral, we're receiving a transmission, reported Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, who had been promoted to communications chief after her work during the evacuation. It's coming from the Valian Trade Federation. Jake walked over to her station. The Valians were a peaceful merchant species that controlled several important trade routes. What do they want? Amy worked with the translation programs that had been improved with Zephyrian technology. They're asking for help, sir. They say they're being invaded by an unknown enemy. Jake wasn't surprised. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about humanity's successful rescue of the Zephyrians. Other species that had previously ignored human contact requests were now very interested in making friends with the Deathworlders who had accomplished the impossible. Tell them we'll send a diplomatic mission to learn more, Jake decided. And Amy, prepare a full analysis of their situation. On Sanctuary, the first joint human-Zephyrian research facility was producing remarkable results. Dr. Susan Wright worked alongside Zephyrian scientists in laboratories that looked like something from a dream. Crystal walls glowed with soft light, and holographic displays showed complex data in 3 dimensions. The medical applications alone could revolutionize healthcare throughout the galaxy, Dr. Wright explained to a group of visiting human officials. Zephyrian energy healing techniques can repair damage at the cellular level. One of the Zephyrian researchers, a being called Tilson, demonstrated their latest discovery. By combining human biological knowledge with our energy manipulation, we can heal injuries that were previously impossible to treat. The collaboration between the two species had benefits beyond just technology. Dr. Lisa Park, who had stayed on Sanctuary as the human ambassador to the Zephyrian government, had observed remarkable changes in both communities. The Zephyrians are learning to be more assertive, she reported to Admiral Carter during one of their regular communications. They're not the same passive people who waited to die on their homeworld. Working with humans has taught them that sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in. And what about the humans? Admiral Carter asked. We're learning patience and precision from them, Lisa replied. Zephyrian methods are more elegant than our usual approach of hitting problems with bigger hammers. The city of New Ethros had become a symbol of this cooperation. Engineer Maria Santos had led the construction project, creating a settlement that combined human practicality with Zephyrian beauty. The buildings were made of crystal that had been reinforced with human engineering techniques, making them both stunning and practically indestructible. It's not just a city, Maria explained to a group of Galactic reporters who had come to document the refugee settlement. It's proof that different species can work together to create something better than either could build alone. The children of both species had adapted to their shared world faster than anyone had expected. Human kids and young Zephyrians played together in the parks that surrounded the crystal spires, their laughter echoing through the halls of the city. But not everyone in the galaxy was happy about the human-Zephyrian alliance. The Vortac Empire, humiliated by their defeat at Sanctuary, had been building up their military forces for another attack. Intelligence reports suggested they were developing new weapons specifically designed to counter human Zephyrian technology. Colonel Frank White, now in charge of Sanctuary's defense forces, was preparing for the possibility of another Vortac invasion. They won't make the same mistakes they made last time, he told his officers during a strategy meeting. We need to be ready for anything. His defensive preparations included both human soldiers and Zephyrian volunteers who had learned to operate defensive systems. The peaceful aliens had discovered that they could fight when their new home was threatened. The Zephyrians aren't the same people we rescued, observed Sergeant Jennifer Clark, who had been training some of the alien volunteers. They've got backbone now. Meanwhile, the success of the Zephyrian rescue had attracted attention from across the galaxy. The Galactic Council, a loose organization of the major spacefaring civilizations, had invited Admiral Carter to address their assembly. She stood before representatives of over 40 different species, many of whom had previously dismissed humanity as insignificant. The Great Hall was filled with beings of every imaginable shape and size, from the crystalline Altarians to the gas cloud Nebulans. Honorable delegates, Admiral Carter began. 1 year ago, the Zephyrian people faced extinction. 12 different civilizations received their plea for help. 11 said it was impossible. Humanity said we would try. The hall was silent as she continued. We didn't save the Zephyrians because we wanted their technology, though that technology has benefited all of us. We didn't do it for political advantage, though new alliances have resulted. We did it because it was the right thing to do. A delegate from the Centauri Alliance, a proud species that had refused to help with the Zephyrian evacuation, stood up. Admiral Carter, your species took enormous risks for strangers. Many of us thought you were being foolish. And now? Admiral, Carter asked. Now we see that there is wisdom in what you call compassion, the Centauri delegate replied. My government would like to discuss joining your alliance. Similar requests came from dozens of other species over the following weeks. The human Zephyrian alliance was becoming the fastest-growing political organization in the galaxy. Chancellor Vexhai, now serving as the Zephyrian representative to the alliance, often reflected on how much his people had changed. A year ago, we thought strength meant avoiding conflict, he told Dr. Lisa Park during one of their conversations. Now we understand that true strength sometimes means being willing to fight for others. The transformation was visible throughout Zephyrian society. Their young people were volunteering for the Alliance military. Their scientists were developing new technologies specifically designed to help other species. They had learned from humanity that power should be used to protect the weak, not just to protect yourself. But the biggest test of the new alliance came when the distress call arrived from the Velian Trade Federation. Admiral Jake Morrison led a joint human-Zephyrian fleet to investigate, arriving to find the Velian worlds under attack by a species no one had encountered before. The attackers called themselves the Swarm, and they consumed entire planets, stripping them of all resources, before moving on to the next target. They had already destroyed 2 Velian colonies and were approaching the Federation's capital world. "Admiral, the Velian defense forces have been completely overwhelmed," reported Captain Kate Johnson, whose ship New Denver had been converted into a mobile command center. "They're requesting immediate evacuation assistance." Jake looked at the tactical display. The situation was similar to the Zephyrian crisis, but this time humanity wasn't acting alone. Zephyrian energy shields protected the human ships, while human weapons provided the firepower needed to fight the swarm vessels. "All ships begin evacuation operations," Jake ordered, "and send a message to the swarm fleet. Tell them they've made a mistake attacking people under our protection." The Battle of Velia lasted 3 days. The swarm had superior numbers, but they had never faced an enemy that combined human tactical flexibility with Zephyrian technology. When human fighters used Zephyrian stealth fields to appear invisible, the swarm couldn't target them. When Zephyrian energy weapons were combined with human targeting systems, they became devastatingly accurate. Most importantly, the Alliance fleet fought with a purpose the swarm couldn't understand. The human Zephyrian forces weren't trying to conquer territory or gather resources. They were fighting to protect innocent people from destruction. "The swarm is retreating," reported Dr. Kevin Shaw from his science vessel. "Their ships are leaving the system." "Let them go," Jake decided. "But make sure they understand that this region is under Alliance protection now." As the evacuation ships carried Velian refugees to safety, Jake received a communication from Chancellor Vexahai on Sanctuary. "Admiral Morrison, the Galactic Council has announced that 15 more species wish to join our alliance. They say they want to be part of an organization that actually helps people." Jake smiled as he looked out at the mixed fleet of human and Zephyrian ships working together to save the Velians. "Tell them they're welcome as long as they understand what we're about." "And what are we about?" the Chancellor asked. "We're about making sure that when someone calls for help, they get an answer."